Good evening, everybody. Thanks again for your patience. I really appreciate everybody coming out. First, I wanted to thank Janus Funds and Heather Jack. Heather and us go back 15 years, I think, now at this point. So they've been a great partner of ours in events and in just in helping us with everybody's portfolios here. I want to introduce everybody to Ben Rizzuto. Ben's been working for Janus for eons also. He's been in the industry for 20 years. He's a CFP charter holder. A little fun fact about Ben is that he has his MBA in finance and Italian, which I thought was cool. So, all right, good for you, Ben. So he's going to be talking to us about some of these, financial issues that scams or whatever that are going around, and I think he's going to do a great job tonight. So I'm really pumped about tonight's presentation. So everybody, please give Ben a round of applause.
Super. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking some time to be with us tonight for an issue that, unfortunately, as I've talked with a couple of you this evening, is something that all of us have to be aware of, unfortunately, more and more. And that's this idea of fraud, financial exploitation, cybersecurity, et cetera, et cetera. So, my hope for tonight is that you'll walk away not completely paranoid, because that's always my fear when we do this topic, but at least more clear on what you should be looking out for when it comes to these sorts of scams and fraud attempts and things like that. I also want to make sure that you walk away knowing that there are resources to help you and your family, right? Resources that can help educate you and your family on some of these issues that we need to be aware of, and namely remind you that there are resources through Paragon-Wealth that should be your first point of contact if there is any sort of issue that arises or even concern that arises as far as this goes. All right? So if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have stories, please feel free to share those tonight. I think a lot of the value that I've seen when giving this presentation is in the sharing that all of us do with each other, because it allows us to understand what others are seeing, okay? So whether that's during my presentation or after the fact, that is fine. So we're going to touch on a number of different things, as you can see tonight. And we're going to start with two case studies. And these two case studies really highlight who among us needs to worry about fraud or financial exploitation. And we'll start with our first case study. And this is a woman by the name of Brooke Astor. Now, Brooke Astor was a socialite and philanthropist in New York City. She married into the Astor family fortune, which, if you're familiar with the Astor family fortune, it was built on real estate. And if you go back even further, the fur trade in Europe. But as you can see, she got a little bit older. She developed Alzheimer's disease. All right. Unfortunately, she was taken advantage of, and she was taken advantage of by someone close to her. In fact, her son took advantage of her Alzheimer's disease and stole millions of dollars from her by signing checks over to himself or utilizing withdrawal slips. What's interesting is that it was Brooke's grandson, her son's son, who actually came forward with evidence in order to put his father in jail. So for those of you with grandchildren, this is one of those stories to remind them of, to make sure that they take care of their grandparents, right? Besides that, I think this is the stereotypical person that we think about when it comes to financial exploitation or fraud. An older adult who has developed some sort of cognitive decline that is taken advantage of, right? That's our first case study. Let's move to our next case study. Cindy Crawford, someone who, at least in my mind, is eternally youthful, right? But even though that is the case, you can see that she and her husband, Randy Gerber, were the target of a fraud attempt, specifically an extortion attempt. in that someone that she had worked with, not very closely, but somewhat closely, gained access to her home, was able to gain access to some pictures of their daughter, and held those pictures for ransom for $100,000. Luckily, the authorities got involved, and this person was arrested and extradited. Now, what's the important part of this story? Well, this case occurred in 2009. At that point, Cindy Crawford was 46 years old. Her husband, Randy, was 43 years old. They were both in fine physical and mental shape. But they were the targets of a financial exploitation scam. So this really highlights who among us needs to be aware of this. It's not just older Americans. It's not just supermodels and younger Americans. It is all of us who need to be aware of this. So just being here tonight, I think, increases that, or I hope increases that awareness for all of you. Let's talk about, or let's step back and just define what we're talking about a little bit more. As I mentioned, this topic of financial exploitation, and many times gets lumped in with cybersecurity or fraud. And yes, we who study these subjects have definitive examples of each. I don't think it's really important for you all to be knowledgeable in what's the difference between cybersecurity and financial exploitation. But let's take a step back and define this for us. Here you can see three separate definitions for financial exploitation. Underneath that gray circle, the misappropriation or misuse of an older and or vulnerable adult's assets. Now for me, the most important part of that definition is the and or, right? Because it's not just older adults, as we saw, it is vulnerable adults, and we saw that all of us may be vulnerable to this. Looking at the other two definitions, deceiving someone with the promise of goods or services that may not exist, utilizing someone else's checks without their permission. If you think about all three of those definitions, there is no age requirement for any of those. These are things that could happen to each and every one of us. So it again highlights that all of us need to be aware of this. Let's now talk about, or move from the what to the who. Who are the common perpetrators of financial exploitation? And as we saw from our first case, unfortunately, it can be those close to us who take advantage of us. As you can see, family members may take advantage of us. It could be caregivers. It could be complete strangers. But 62% of the time, it is someone that a person already knows and or trusts. So the question then arises, well, what do we do with this? Because I know many of us have tried to get rid of our families, right? And they just keep showing up, right? So we may not be able to do that. But what I think this really highlights is the value of creating a plan, right? And you've talked about your financial plan with your advisor, but within that financial plan, asking yourself or thinking through questions of, how are we going to age? How is it we'd like to be cared for as we age? Who is going to be taking care of us as we age? Having those details in your financial plan is incredibly important, because then that allows us to share that plan with trusted professionals, our advisor, our attorney, CPA, and even maybe our family members, if we trust them, right? And this allows those trusted individuals to say or notice when there has been a deviation to that plan. Is there a new person taking care of mom or dad? Who is this new person? Do we need to figure out who this person is and make sure that everything is on the up and up? So it really just highlights the fact that we need to create a plan when it comes to these sorts of issues, not just our financial issues. Before we move off the definitions of financial exploitation and who the common perpetrators are, I want to touch on three factors that increase one's vulnerability to financial exploitation. And these are things that all of us need to try to be aware of, because as I mentioned, they are going to increase one's vulnerability to financial exploitation. So they are physical decline, psychological decline, or cognitive decline. So what do I mean by those? Let's touch on each. With psychological decline, what are we talking about there? What I'm talking about is increased depression, which could lead to increased loneliness or decreased fulfillment, right? So what we need to think about is, what are periods when someone might be going through that psychological decline? Could be after the loss of a loved one or a spouse. Those are periods when people may be psychologically in peril. Another one to think about, which many people don't think about as much, is retirement. Now, all of us are looking forward to, or have looked forward to, our retirement. But what research shows is that even though we may charge into retirement with all sorts of chutzpah, after a few weeks, there's a bit of a sugar rush as far as things go. Along with that, our social networks may shrink a little bit. We may not have as much fulfillment in our life. So that may be a period of time when someone is or has psychologically declined. The point to remember here is to think about who are the loved ones in our life, who are the people in our life who may be experiencing that, and then make sure we bring them into the fold again. Make sure that they're connected. Physical decline, I think this makes pretty good sense, but as we become more vulnerable, as we become more dependent on someone, that may increase our vulnerability. That increases our dependency on someone, our vulnerability to be taken advantage of. The final one is cognitive decline. And cognitive decline may be the most difficult of these to look at and see, because cognitive functioning works on a spectrum, right? And there's nothing within that spectrum that really shows us or tells us that Ricardo has gone from, being sound cognitively to mild dementia, right? So we need to think about, when have we noticed, or are we noticing, any cognitive decline in our loved ones? And again, the real issue with all three of these is that they are very subtle. They occur over months, if not years, if not decades. And that's why your advisors, in many cases, kind of as the title page mentioned, are the first line of defense when it comes to these things. They're lucky enough to sit down with you over years, if not decades, and be able to see those things, right? But it's also up to us as family members and loved ones to try to notice when those things occur as well, okay? So those are the things to be looking out for: psychological decline, physical decline, or cognitive mental decline, all right? Next, let's talk about the trends. And I think all of us can probably guess what the charts on the next few slides are going to show, because the trends are not good. These are cases that we hear more and more. I know it has affected people in this room. So the trends are bad, right? But let's take a look at it, because I think it's going to highlight something that's really important for us to understand. First off, the FBI puts out a report on an annual basis, their Elder Fraud Report. And as you can see, in 2023, 101,000 people over 60 lost $3.4 billion to financial exploitation. The 2024 report has come out. The number of victims has increased. The dollar amounts have increased to, I believe, $4 billion as well. But the thing to note here is that these are people who actually came forward and reported their case. These are dollars that were actually lost. Think about the number of people where there have been attempts, right? And AARP has actually done some research on this, and they have estimated that up to $20 billion may be at risk over the course of a year in the United States. So again, this really just highlights how important this is, and unfortunately how much this affects all of us. While this is the case, You may be thinking back to the beginning of my presentation where I talked about how all of us need to worry about this. And I'm just talking about 60-year-olds, 60-plus-year-olds, right? Well, here are the stats for everybody else. You can see here, doesn't matter if you are in your 20s, like me, in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and or 60s, all of us have lost millions of dollars through financial exploitation or fraud. So it doesn't matter how cognitively sound one is, how physically fit you are, or how technologically savvy you may be, we may be at risk of this. It also does not depend on intelligence, right? These are things that affect each and every one of us. These are things that have affected very intelligent people around the world, okay? Now, one thing that I think is really important is to dig into these numbers a little bit. And there are two charts on this slide that, again, show the trends as far as both victims and dollars lost. So if we look at the bar chart there on, let's see, your right, the orange bars show a pretty clear trend. Dollars lost continues to go up pretty clearly, right? But if we look at the line graph there on the left, the number of victims, while the trend line is upward and that the number of victims is increasing, we do see a bit of deviation in that, right? And we see a deviation and we see an actual decrease from 2020 down to 2021 and 2022. So the question that I have thought about over the years of doing this presentation is, well, why? Why is there that decrease going from 2020 into 2022? I think there's a couple answers to this question. First off, what happened in 2020? Not much, right? Yeah. Okay. COVID, yes. Now, it doesn't matter how much or little you were affected by COVID. I think all of us will agree that we felt a lot more or were a lot more isolated in 2020 than we were in 2019 or we are obviously today. So I think part of the reason for the decline is that people felt isolated, they felt alone, they didn't know who to turn to, right? And that's one of the reasons we wanted to make sure to do this tonight, is to remind you all that there are resources to help, all right? The other thing that I think speaks to the decline, as well as the fact that that number of victims is probably low, is that we must remember there is a tremendous amount of guilt and shame and embarrassment that people feel when they are victimized by this. I'm sure you have seen stories about these sort of cases on the news or in the newspaper. I know I have seen stories where family members will come forward and they will talk about how they have been victimized, right? They didn't know who to turn to. They were embarrassed. They were losing more and more money, right? They didn't know where to turn. They were embarrassed. And in many cases, I've seen people have committed suicide because of this, right? So again, it really just highlights, I think, how important this topic is and why I have been flying all over the country over the past couple of years talking about this to make sure that we destigmatize the issue. Unfortunately, this is going to continue to happen, but we need to be open and honest with ourselves, with our loved ones, with our advisors, if we think something is going on, to make sure that you all are protected and that your assets are protected as well. Okay, we're going to come to what I think is the most important part of the presentation. We're going to go over the 7 most common types of fraud that is in that FBI report that comes out every year. And this is the most important part of the presentation because research has shown that if someone is educated or hears about a certain type of fraud, then the likelihood that they fall for a similar type of scam drops by 80%, all right? So just by listening to this part of the presentation, you can tune out for the rest. I don't care. But if you listen to this part, you are going to be doing yourself a service, all right? And if you share these stories with your friends, that's going to help protect them as well. We're going to go over the 7 most common types of fraud that the FBI sees on an annual basis, all right? And like I said, these are the things that you should be looking out for. At the end of the presentation, we'll have time for questions, so if you have those, we can cover them then. But let's go ahead and jump in to this and start with our first one, and this is call center fraud, tech customer support fraud, okay? So how does this occur? When does this happen? Well, this occurs when we receive a call, an email, a text, or a pop-up on our computer screen telling us that there is something wrong with our computer, our device, or our software, right? When we answer that call or click on the link in that email or click on that pop-up, that opens the door for scammers, okay? So, I've thought a lot, obviously, about this presentation over the past couple of years, and I've thought about pop-ups a lot, which, probably none of us have, but I have. I've thought about pop-ups a lot, and I've thought to myself, when's the last time you got a pop-up on your screen and you're like, thank goodness I got that pop-up? Besides free shipping or 10% off, pop-ups, I think you can just, as a rule, X them out, close them out, right? Nothing good is going to come from a pop-up besides a small discount, which no big deal, okay? Couple tips to think about when it comes to these sorts of issues. Like I said, these may come in the form of an email. Thing to remember when it comes to tech support, companies like Microsoft, Apple, Dell, whomever it may be, they are not going to reach out to you proactively to tell you that there is an issue with your computer or your software, okay? Now, if you reach out to them and tell them that you have an issue, well then yes, you may have a chat conversation there. That may start an email chain, but they are rarely, if ever, going to reach out to you proactively on these issues.
That's such a good point, because most of the people that we have was the initiation.
Right.
That have called in.
Mm-hmm.
They got a pop-up, they owe money, a balance, or they
Right.
there's a refund. So
Right.
remember, the companies don't reach out to you.
Exactly. So proactively, or if they're reaching out to you proactively out of the blue, that should be a red flag. A couple other tips to think about when it comes to these sorts of specifically emails and in many cases texts. But when you receive those, they may be worded somewhat oddly, right? Because in many cases, scammers are using artificial intelligence, or they're from another country, so their English may be a little bit different than ours. I've gotten a number of emails where you can just tell from the salutation, right? This is a little bit off. Another thing you can do when you get that email from, let's just say, for example, Apple support, right? Think about that email. At the top of it, there's to and from, right? And it would say, to Ben Rizzuto from Apple support. Remember, you can click on Apple support, and that will show you the exact email address that has come from. And what we see many times is that there is a slight misspelling in that word or name, or it comes from an email address that has nothing to do with Apple support. So maybe it's APLE support, whatever, at apple.com. That's one way, and a really good way to filter a lot of this junk out. I'm sorry? Logos, yes. Now, with artificial intelligence, it's getting even easier for scammers to do this, but logos many times will look a little bit off. Let me provide you with an example that happened with me, and this gets into government impersonation. And it goes back to my example regarding emails. Now, along with financial exploitation, I talk about financial planning and retirement-related topics. So Social Security is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about. So if you want to spend an hour or two talking about that, I'm happy to do so. But because of that interest, when I get emails from the Social Security Administration, my ears perk up. I got an email from the Social Security Administration last year, and it said that my Social Security number had been suspended. Now, I wasn't aware that they suspended Social Security numbers, but I read the email, and it gave me a number that I could call to have my Social Security number unsuspended. But before I did that, I did exactly what I told you to do. I went up and I double-clicked on Social Security Administration, which the email said it was from, and I found that the email came from alanacohen141@gmail.com. Now, say what you will about the federal government, the Social Security Administration, or their efforts to cut expenses. I do not think they are running their email on a free Gmail account. So that became an easy delete and a great story for a presentation like this. But again, it's just taking some time to really think about what we are receiving, and that can help in a lot of these cases. Next, let's move to investment scams. Now, my hope is that if you are working with the folks at Paragon, anytime an investment opportunity comes to your door, your first call is to them. Now, while that is the case, you can see that thousands of Americans were not so lucky, and that 6,400 people lost almost $1 billion in investment scams in 2023. So there's a few common characteristics when it comes to these investment scams. First off, this investment opportunity will come to you unsolicited. All right? That's the first thing. Secondly, it will offer high reward with little to no risk. That's a second characteristic. And third, there will be some sort of time limit, a timeline associated with it. You're eligible for this opportunity, but only for a short period of time. What has occurred here? Well, this scammer has turned up the urgency on this investment opportunity. And we as humans do not like urgency. We do not like problems. If there's a problem or an issue, we want to take care of it as quickly as possible. So we feel as if we have to act. And this makes us act, usually, in these cases, in the wrong way. Along with that, we should remind ourselves of the old adage of, does this sound too good to be true? All right? And just by taking a moment to ask ourselves that question, ask ourselves, why am I so lucky to get this opportunity? And asking ourselves, well, why is there a time limit on this, may provide us with that moment of pause to look at this with clear eyes. A couple other things that I'll note, and this is an investment scam that I've seen over the past couple of years. How many of you have a timeshare? Okay. How many of you would like to get rid of your timeshare? Good man. All right. So, that is usually what happens, right? Many people have a timeshare. They want to get rid of their timeshare. The problem is that the Mexican cartel has gotten lists of people who have timeshares. They have called them, and they have said, remind me of your name? Gary? Gary, would you like to get rid of your timeshare? Boy, would I, right? How do I? And they say, well, send us a check for $25,000, $50,000, $100,000. We'll start the process. There was an actual article in the New York Times last year that goes over this exact scam, okay? So, again, we need to stop and think, why am I so lucky as to get this opportunity, all right? But by taking some time, talking with your advisor, that's one way that we can flesh out a valid investment opportunity versus an invalid investment opportunity. Lottery, sweepstakes, and inheritance scams. This is one that I think all of us have dealt with, and we've dealt with it when we have received an email that tells us that some way, somehow, we are part of a royal lineage, right? In Europe, or in many cases, Africa, right? This happens so frequently in the past that it has a name. It's called the Nigerian prince scam, right? So we were either part of a royal family or a Nigerian prince reached out to us and said, if you would, please help me get out of this jam. If you help me, there is a great reward at the end. So what are these scammers doing? Well, again, they're facing us with a problem. They are leveraging the inherent kindness that all of us have, the responsibility we have to help others. In other cases, and in many cases, they may be taking advantage of some level of greed that people may have. But the thing to remember when it comes to an actual lottery, an actual sweepstakes, an actual inheritance, is that there is no prepayment that has to occur in order to receive that reward, right? Now, of course, if you receive an inheritance or a lottery payment, there may be a tax situation at the end of that, but that's a separate issue, okay? So there's no prepayment penalty that occurs when it comes to a valid lottery, sweepstakes, or inheritance, and that's the main thing to note with those. Our next scam, I believe, is the most difficult scam to deal with. Confidence and romance scams. And before we get into this, I want to take a step back and talk about just us as humans. What is it that we as humans need? Right. Before even love, we need food, we need shelter, but right after that, we need companionship, emotional support, love, things like that. And unfortunately, scammers are taking advantage of people who are just looking to meet that very human need of having someone in their life. And as you can see, this has led to over $300 million in losses from those who are online dating. Now, why is this so difficult for us to deal with? Especially difficult for us as loved ones to deal with. It's difficult because none of us like to hear that we are being taken advantage of. None of us like to hear that we are making a mistake, right? So, my colleague Heather, she might tell me about, someone that she's dating online or has met online, right? And she's happily married, but she's going to be the person in this story today, right? And she may tell me about this person that she's met and how it seems like the guy that she's going to spend the rest of her life with, and, it seems really great, but he needs $100,000 to fix this or that. Now, my ears perk up when I hear this, but I cannot, or my first inclination is to reach across the table and grab Heather by the shoulders and say, "You are being such an idiot. This person is trying to steal your money." But think about that. That conversation takes a turn right then and there because Heather doesn't want to hear that. She doesn't want to hear that she's being taken advantage of or has made a mistake. So that's why this is so difficult for us to deal with as loved ones. So how can we approach this a little bit more tactfully? All right, and there's a 3-step process that we can talk about. Have you heard? Here are the facts. This is what we should do. All right? So step 1, have you heard? Right? Have you heard that more and more people are dating online? And many of those people may be taken advantage of. And you may say, sure, yeah, I've heard about those people. I've got some friends that are doing it. Deb met a great guy. Gary made blah, 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 right? That's step 1. Did you know that people lost over $300 million through that last year? I didn't know that. That sounds pretty serious. Step 3. Well, based on all that, what I think we should do is really figure out who this person is. Have you been able to meet them in person, or does there always seem to be something that comes up where they can't meet in person, right? Now, by going at it at that direction, we have talked about this as an issue that has affected others, right? We have talked about this in a way where we want to help someone, we want to do something in their best interest, right? We haven't told them that they're making a mistake. So I think that's a much better, much more tactful way to approach this versus just reaching across the table and saying you're being taken advantage of. Okay, so keep that in mind. A couple tips for those of you who may be dating online. Those dating websites, Match.com, whatever they may be, right? They do have some level of protection on them, right? What scammers will do many times is if there is a match, they will try to move that conversation off the platform onto some messaging system very quickly. So it could be iMessage, it could be WhatsApp, right? WhatsApp is a red flag. It's great for messaging when you're traveling internationally, but WhatsApp can be a red flag, or it could be Facebook Messenger. But once you've done that, you've gone off platform, and some of those protections that they have in place are lost. So that would be a red flag if you meet someone and they move that conversation off the platform very quickly. The other big red flag is, have you met them in person? Can they answer questions about where you live? I heard a story from a woman who lived up in Long Island or something like that. She had met someone, she mentioned something about what she was doing, and the guy had no idea what she was talking about, even though he said he was from New York, right? So just be aware of those sorts of things, all right? Extortion, we saw extortion in our Cindy Crawford case. And unfortunately, this is an area where I think artificial intelligence and technology is going to make this, unfortunately, easier for scammers. They can do this by mocking up pictures, recreating voices, and subjecting us to these scams. The fact that is important to know when it comes to voice recreation, it only takes 3 seconds of audio to recreate someone's voice, all right? So I am in definite peril based on all the time I've talked tonight, right? But what is occurring more and more is that scammers are going onto social media networks, platforms, Instagram, but more likely TikTok or Snapchat. What are they doing? They are finding a young person, right? They are finding that young person, they're taking a snippet of their voice, and then they're recreating it. Then they're finding who that young person's parent, grandparent, or great-grandparent is. And what happens? That person gets a call. Grandma, Grandpa, I'm in trouble, I need money, don't tell mom and dad, right? And I don't care if you're a parent, a grandparent, a great-grandparent, what's our first inclination? We drop everything, and we're going to help that kid, right? And this is where I'm going to ask you to do something difficult. I'm going to ask you to possibly hang up on that child, right? And this goes against everything in our being as parents, right? But it's a good idea in these cases, and we're going to send you a video of someone who was taken advantage of through this, this sort of scam as a follow-up. But if you're able to stop, pause, call that child, that grandchild from another line or on another number, reach out to their parent, that can be the way to make sure that you're not taken advantage of, okay?
Do they use AI to generate their voice?
They can, yeah. Now another way that I think is that we can protect ourselves is for families to have a safe word, right? A safe word, right? So if my daughter gives me a call, like the one I just described to you, I can ask her, what's the safe word? I'm not going to tell you what it is, right? It wouldn't be safe then, right? But I can ask her, and she can say it, and that way I can verify that it really is her. And I'll tell you a story. I was doing this presentation in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a couple years ago. And a gentleman came up to me after the presentation, and he said, you know what, I got one of those calls the other day, but I knew it was a scam. I was like, oh yeah? How was that? He said, you know why? Because they called me Grandpa. And I'm not Grandpa, I'm Pop, right? So again, we need to stop and really try to be just as in tune and vigilant as possible, all right? And I know it can be difficult, but that, I hope, is a rule that we walk away with, okay?
So real quick.
Yes. Please, Ricardo.
I was with someone last night who said that their dad called for franchise scam, and he said that he knew, or whoever was impersonating his grandson, knew the nickname that he
So the scammer knew the nickname that, okay. Yeah. Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, you know, and it exactly. Yeah, we can we can talk about estate planning based on this, right? All right, cool. Let's move on so we can have some more conversation after this. Non-payment, non-delivery scams. As more and more of our purchases move online, unfortunately, more and more items are not being sent to folks. And if you spend any time online, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it may be, there are a lot of products that show up on our feeds. There is a soccer jersey that keeps showing up on my Instagram feed that I wish was not a scam because it is so cool. But I know it's a scam, right? So a couple things to note here. When we're doing purchases online, what are some things to notice? What are some things that can protect us? Think about the places where we do most of our online business. Amazon, Walmart, right? These are companies that have huge online presences, and they're mostly fine. But one thing we can do is when we look at a product, we should look at the seller. How long have they been on the platform? Is it relatively recently that they've been on? How many reviews do they have? I mean, this in a lot of cases just comes back to know your business, know who you're doing business with. You guys all right? I don't want to make sure anyone's not cut over there. We don't need to. Okay. So how long have they been on the platform? What are their reviews? Do they have a return policy? Many scammers will not take returns, okay? So that's one way to do it. Google reviews online, that's always a good idea. If you see one of those businesses in a social media feed, check it online, right? Go to Google, search for it there, see what people say there. That can be a good way to protect yourself. And then finally, remember, when making purchases with your debit card versus your credit card may actually have some level of protection, whereas your debit card may not. All right? I can see some interesting conversations on the way home are going to happen here. Okay? All right. So those are some things to think about there. Final one, cryptocurrency. We can talk about cryptocurrency as an investment opportunity at a later date, but for our purposes tonight, if cryptocurrency comes up, that is a huge red flag because that is the preferred payment method for all of these things. Say again? Oh, yeah. Here's the thing to remember when it comes to cryptocurrency, right? Your chances of recourse for one of these scams goes from slim to pretty much zero as soon as those dollars get turned into cryptocurrency, okay? And unfortunately, I have seen many people or seen many stories where people have gone down to their local liquor store and they've changed dollars into crypto and their retirement funds, their children's college funds have disappeared, okay? So those are the most 7 common types of things. We can talk about more after we finish up. Let me talk about some resources before we close up for tonight. We've partnered with Wayne State University to put together this presentation. Wayne State University is in Detroit, Michigan. They have a wonderful Institute of Gerontology which has looked at and studied the way people age, and unfortunately they have found that financial exploitation is becoming more and more common part of the aging process. So they have created a number of resources, not only for advisors, but for clients and family members to understand what these issues look like, what these scams are, what are some questions we can ask our clients or our loved ones if we think that this is going on, right? And just ways to protect ourselves. So if you look up Wayne State University Institute of Gerontology, they have a website. It's called olderadultnestegg.com. We'll make sure you all get that, right? It's not a scam, the website, right? Okay, I have been there. It is a valid website, olderadultnestegg.com, right? But all of those resources are free, all right? All of those resources are things that the folks at Paragon use, right? So they have those questions in hand. So they may ask you those questions. And remember, if they ask you those questions, they're not doing so to, make things difficult for you. They're trying to make sure that they protect you and your nest egg, all right? So like I said, there are these tools and resources that you can find through Wayne State University that you can use. Another great idea is to make sure that you have a trusted contact on your account. That trusted contact is someone that your advisor can reach out to if they feel that something is amiss. And then finally, through Wayne State, to this point, we've talked about ways to ensure or try to ensure that this doesn't happen. But from the trends, I think we all know that these things are unfortunately going to continue. It is my sincere hope that it doesn't happen to anyone in this room. But these are things that we're going to continue to see. If that happens, Wayne State has this SAFE program that allows you and your advisor to reach out and talk with people who have dealt with this. Counselors who can talk you through some of the next steps. Now, I know Paragon's got a number of next steps that they'll take through from a compliance standpoint and things like that. But these are folks that have dealt with this not only from a kind of blocking and tackling operational standpoint, but from a psychological standpoint. They've talked with dozens, if not hundreds, of people about what to do next emotionally and psychologically. So just know that that is a resource as well, all right? So as I finish up, a couple things that I will note. First off, remember, resources are available, right? We just talked about Wayne State, but more than anything, you've got resources in the room that you should reach out to if you are worried about any of this stuff. The final thing that I always mention when it comes to this presentation is I talk about life decisions, right? Now, I think we would agree that financial decisions probably fall in the realm of life decisions, right? Those financial decisions are going to affect our lives maybe for many years. Life decisions should be human decisions, right? So if you're thinking about making a life decision or a financial decision, make sure you reach out to someone. Talk to your spouse, talk to your advisor, talk to someone else who is going to allow you to review it, understand it, and maybe ask some good questions so that they understand it as well, but also so you're protected, okay? So, as we finish up, I hope this has provided some ideas. Again, I hope you do not walk out of here completely paranoid, but politely paranoid, right? As far as scammers are concerned,